The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary Tuesday that had no business carrying that much weight. Clara Mendez found it taped to her apartment door at 7:15 in the morning, still in her waitress uniform from the overnight shift, shoes in her hand so she wouldn't wake the kids. The paper was yellow. She hadn't known they came in yellow. She'd always imagined something more dramatic. Red ink, maybe, or a sheriff's knock that shook the whole hallway. Instead, it was yellow paper. Standard font. 30 days written near the bottom like a polite suggestion. Like the building manager was simply reminding her of a dentist appointment she might have forgotten. She stood in the hallway for a long time. Inside, her daughter Lily was asleep on the pull-out couch, with her arm around her little brother Marco, who had kicked off his blanket the way he always did, no matter the season. 6 years old, and he fought every blanket like it had personally offended him. 9 years old, and Lily had taken to tucking him back in sometime in the night, without being asked, without being told, just because she'd learned that things didn't always get done if you waited for someone else to do them. She was 9. She shouldn't have had to learn that yet. Clara folded the yellow notice into a square, small enough to fit inside her apron pocket. Then she went inside, set her shoes by the door, and started making oatmeal. $312. That was what lived in her bank account on the morning of the yellow notice. $312 against $1,400 in back rent, against $280 for Marco's asthma medication, then against the electric bill that had started showing numbers in red, against a school supply list Lily had placed on the refrigerator with careful, hopeful handwriting that made Clara's throat close every time she looked at it. $312 and the overnight shift at Rosario's diner paid $60, sometimes $70 with tips, and she had already asked her manager Elena for an advance twice in the past month, and the second time Elena had looked at her with an expression that was not unkind, but was tired. The way people look when they are sorry, but have used up their sorry. This was what Clara Mendez's life looked like at 34 years old. It had not always looked like this. There had been a job, a real one, a good one, at Franklin Elementary School, where she had been the head librarian for 6 years and had known every child's name and which books they would love before they knew it themselves. She had built a reading corner with beanbag chairs and a papier-mâché tree that the third graders had made with her. She had organized a summer program that brought in 40 kids a week. She had been good at it. She had been genuinely good at it. And then the district had faced a budget shortfall, and librarians, apparently, were a luxury. And on a Friday afternoon in March, a woman from the central office had handed her a manila envelope and said the word restructuring in the tone people use when they mean something they don't want to name. That was 14 months ago. The divorce from Ernesto had come 2 years before that, which meant Clara had spent the better part of 30 months in a kind of sustained emergency. Not the sharp, sudden kind that galvanizes people into action. The slow kind, the kind that erodes, the kind where every morning you calculate whether you can afford both groceries and the copay, and every night you lie awake running numbers that never add up, and somewhere in between you are still a mother, and you still have to make the oatmeal and check the homework. And remember that Lily had a field trip form due on Thursday. She had not told her family how bad it was. That was pride, maybe, or something that lived close to pride without being exactly the same thing. Her older brother Diego had made something of himself in real estate and made sure most conversations circled back to that fact. Her Aunt Patricia, her mother's sister, Why had the particular talent of framing concern as judgment, the way some people turn every question into an accusation without raising their voice. The cousins were fine. They were just people. But they belonged to a family where Clara had always been the soft one, the dreamy one, the one who chose books and children and art projects over practicality. And her life had proceeded to demonstrate, apparently, every risk of that choice. The one person Clara had never felt that way around was her grandmother. Rosa Mendez had been 87 years old, and still sharp in the way old women who have survived real things tend to be sharp, not loud about it, not boastful, just precise. She had come to the United States in 1954 from a small town in Oaxaca, Mexico, with her husband Arturo and a single suitcase and a wooden chest that her father had built for her as a wedding gift. Arturo had found work in the garment district. Rosa had found work wherever work appeared, cleaning houses, watching children, working a sewing machine in a factory that was cold in winter and sweltering in summer. When Arturo died in 1971, Rosa had kept working. When the factory closed in 1979, Rosa had opened a small alterations shop out of the back of a dry cleaning place on Clement Street in San Francisco, and she had run it for 22 years until her hands made fine work difficult. She had not been wealthy. Everyone in the family agreed on that. Rosa had lived in the same small house in the Excelsior district for 41 years, painted the same pale yellow every decade, with a fig tree in the backyard and a garden of herbs she used in cooking. She wore sensible shoes. She drove a 1998 Buick until she stopped driving. She accepted help graciously and never asked for it. The family had always understood Rosa as a woman who had very little and gave a great deal of it away, and that was the shape of her in everyone's mind, generous and modest, and not a source of anything material. What Rosa was to Clara was home. Every Sunday for as long as Clara could remember, she had gone to Rosa's house, first as a child with her parents, then as a teenager who went alone on the bus, then as a young woman who brought her boyfriend, and later her husband, and finally as a mother who brought her children and let them learn what family could feel like when it was not in competition with itself. Rosa taught Lily to embroider. She taught Marco to make tortillas, letting him flour the board himself until the kitchen was white to the ceiling. She told stories about Oaxaca that she adjusted for age, simpler for the children, fuller for Clara. Stories about the market and the mountains, and the marigolds they laid on the graves in November, and the way her father had worked the wood in his shop with his hands until something beautiful appeared where there had been nothing. Clara had been the one who went to Rosa's house when Rosa got sick, not once, repeatedly. For 2 years, she had driven across the city on Sunday mornings and sometimes on Thursday evenings, bringing soup and medicine and library books. She still knew how to get library books, and sitting with Rosa while the television murmured in the corner, not because she was obligated, but because Rosa was the one person in Clara's world who had never made her feel like she was failing. Rosa had looked at Clara's life, all of it, the divorce and the job loss and the struggle and the years of quiet humiliation, and she had simply said, "You are still you, Misha. That does not change." And somehow, from Rosa, that had been enough to get through another week. The call came on a Wednesday night in October. Clara was on her break at the diner when her phone buzzed. It was Diego. That alone was unusual enough to stop her mid-sip of bad coffee. Diego called on birthdays and holidays, and occasionally when he needed something. He did not call on random Wednesdays. He told her quietly, in the flat voice people use when they've already spent their emotion. Rosa had passed that afternoon. Peaceful, like the nurse said. In her sleep, in her own bed, which was what she had wanted. Diego said he would handle the arrangements. He was good at handling arrangements. He said there would be a service Friday and a meeting with the attorney the following week, and Clara should keep her calendar open. She finished her shift. She drove home in the dark, past the street lights that made everything orange, past the closed storefronts and the lit windows of other people's apartments, where other people were watching television and washing dishes and living the mundane lives that felt, from outside, like luxury. She sat in the parking lot of her building for 11 minutes before she could make herself go inside. When she finally did, she stood in the doorway of the room where her children slept and watched them breathe for a long time. She did not cry until much later, alone in the bathroom with the fan running so the children wouldn't hear. She cried for Rosa, who had deserved more years. She cried for herself, which felt selfish and was probably honest. She cried because Rosa had been the last place that felt safe, and that place was gone now, and the world was not going to pause to acknowledge that loss before resuming its ordinary demands. The service was small and warm. People who had known Rosa for decades came and told stories that made the room laugh and then go quiet. A woman named Dolores, who had worked alongside Rosa at the factory in 1966, brought pan dulce wrapped in cloth and said that Rosa had once lent her bus money for 6 consecutive weeks without ever mentioning it again. A man named Samuel, who had grown up 2 doors down, said that Rosa had left bags of food outside his family's door during a hard winter in 1983 with no note, and they had all pretended not to know who it was because Rosa would have been embarrassed to be thanked. The priest said the appropriate things. Clara held Marco's hand and let Lily lean against her shoulder and thought about the tortillas and the embroidery and the Sunday afternoons and tried to hold all of it at once without letting go. Diego sat in the front row and checked his phone twice. The attorney's office was in a building downtown that smelled of carpet cleaner and recycled air. His name was Mr. Okafor, and he was thorough and professional and had the precise manner of someone who had delivered complicated news in straightforward language enough times to have learned that clarity was the kindest approach. The family gathered in a conference room. Diego, Aunt Patricia, 2 of Patricia's daughters, Renata and Sophia, and Clara with Lily and Marco, who had been promised hot chocolate afterward and were therefore on their best behavior. Mr. Okafor read through the document with patient care. Rosa's house, the small yellow house in the Excelsior that had been paid off for 20 years, went to Diego. There were reasons stated, practical ones about proximity and experience and the ability to manage property. And Diego received this news with a nod that was almost imperceptible, the nod of a man who had expected no other outcome. The savings account, $4,200, which surprised no one, Rosa had never had much, was divided between Diego and Patricia in equal measure. Rosa's sewing equipment went to a community organization that offered vocational training. The jewelry, modest pieces accumulated over decades, went to Renata and Sophia. Mr. Okafor paused at the final item. To my granddaughter, Clara Elena Mendez, Rosa had written, I leave the hope chest, the one my father built, the one that came with me from Oaxaca, the one that held everything I carried. It is hers. She is the only one who would know what to do with it." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Patricia made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and said, "Well, that's sentimental." Diego looked at Clara across the table with an expression that he probably believed was sympathetic and said, "She always did have a soft spot for you, Clara. It's a nice piece of furniture. Probably worth something at an antique dealer." So he said it in the tone of a man offering consolation. Renata, who was 28, and had a way of saying things that were cruel with the rhythm of things that were funny, said, "What did the appraiser say it was worth?" Mr. Okafor checked his notes. The estate appraiser had listed it at $40. Renata repeated the number slowly, like she was letting it settle. $40. Clara. You visited that woman every week for 2 years, and she left you a $40 box. Sophia pressed her lips together. Patricia studied her fingernails. Diego said, "Clara, seriously, if you want, I can try to get you something from the house, a piece of furniture, something useful." He said it in the voice of a man who believed he was being generous. Clara said nothing. She was looking at her hands on the conference room table and counting her breaths the way the school counselor had taught the children to do when feelings became too large for the space they were in. Marco leaned up and whispered, "Mama, are you okay?" She put her arm around him. She said, "I'm great, baby. We're gonna go get that hot chocolate now." The hope chest was in Rosa's living room, against the wall beneath the window, where the fig tree was visible in the backyard. Clara had seen it there all her life and had never really examined it, the way you don't examine the things that have simply always been present. It was roughly 3 feet long and 18 inches wide, and stood perhaps 20 inches tall. The wood was dark mahogany, very dark, almost black in certain lights, and the surface was carved with a pattern Clara now recognized as marigolds, cempasúchil, and a border of leaves that ran along all 4 edges. The carving was fine and deliberate, the work of someone who understood wood the way Rosa had understood fabric, not as material, but as possibility. Diego helped her carry it to her car. He did it without ceremony. The way you carry something you've already decided is not important. He said, "You sure you don't want anything else?" Clara said she was sure. He said, "Okay, well, call me if you need anything." And she knew that he meant it, and also that she would not call him, because calling him would require a conversation she did not have the reserve to have. She drove home with the chest in the back of her 2009 Honda Civic, which had 211,000 miles on it, and a heater that worked on the right side and not the left. Lily sat sideways in the back seat, leaning against the chest like it was a companion. Marco fell asleep before they left the neighborhood. Clara drove through the city in the late afternoon light and did not speak and did not cry and kept her hand steady on the wheel. That night, after the children were in bed, Lily on the pullout, Marco in the single bedroom that was technically too small for a child, but was his, and that counted for something. Clara sat on the floor in front of the hope chest and looked at it for a long time. $40. She had seen the estate appraiser's number on the document. She had watched Renata say it with the pleasure people take in reducing things. She understood what the family believed, that Rosa had loved Clara best and had still left her the least, and that this was either evidence of Rosa's sentiment overriding her sense, or simply proof that love in the practical world did not balance any ledgers. But Rosa had written something in the will that no one else had seemed to notice, or if they had noticed it, they had not thought about what it meant. She is the only one who would know what to do with it. Clara had turned that sentence over in her mind 3 times on the drive home. Rosa was not a sentimental woman in the careless sense. She was warm, yes. She was loving. But she chose her words the way she had once chosen thread, for strength and purpose, not decoration. She did not say, "I leave this to Clara," because she loved it. She said Clara is the only one who would know what to do with it. What to do with it? Clara reached out and ran her palm along the carved surface. The wood was smooth with decades of handling, the grain warm beneath her fingers in a way that felt almost alive. The marigolds repeated around the perimeter in a rhythm that was neither mechanical nor random, the work of a hand, guided by something that went beyond craft. Clara's great-great-grandfather, a man she had never known, and whose name she had only heard in stories, had made this for his daughter's wedding in a town in Oaxaca in 1940. He had built it without machines, using tools that had belonged to his own father, working in a shop that was also where he slept, because they did not have separate rooms for different purposes in those days. Rosa had carried it on a truck, and then a train, and then a bus in 1954. She had carried it across a border and through a city and into a series of apartments, and finally into the yellow house, where it had stayed for 41 years. Clara lifted the iron latch. It was original hardware, she could tell. Hand-forged, slightly uneven, worn bright at the contact points, where 1,000 fingers had lifted it before hers. The lid opened smoothly on hinges that had been oiled recently enough that they made no sound. Clara paused that detail, but let it pass. Inside, folded with the precision of a woman who understood that how you store a thing reflects how you value it, were quilts. 3 of them, hand-stitched in patterns Clara recognized from her childhood. One in deep reds and oranges, and one in blues that had faded to the color of early morning. One in a pattern of diamonds that Rosa had called the wedding quilt because her mother had made it. Beneath the quilts, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed at the edges, was a stack of letters bound with kitchen twine. Beneath the letters, a small bundle of photographs. Beneath the photographs, a rosary with amber beads and a silver cross. Clara lifted the quilts out carefully, one by one, and set them on the floor beside her. She unwrapped the letters and held them without reading, feeling the age in the paper, the texture of a language. Spanish, she could see that much. Written in a hand she did not recognize, and one she did. She set them aside. She looked at the photographs and recognized Rosa young, younger than Clara was now, standing in front of a building that was not in this country. Standing beside Arturo, who was handsome in the way men were handsome when photographs were rare and expensive and required you to stand still and mean it. Standing beside a man who was holding a piece of wood and smiling with the satisfaction of someone who has just finished something. Her great-great-grandfather. With the chest, which meant the photograph was taken the day it was completed. Clara looked at the photograph, and then at the chest, and then at the photograph again. Then she began to feel it. She had not been thinking about the weight of the thing, not consciously. But she was a woman who had spent 2 years carrying it back and forth, from the living room to Rosa's bedroom when they rearranged things, from one side of the room to the other when the window leaked, and she had a body memory of the chest the way you develop a body memory of anything you've handled enough. And the chest, now empty, sitting in front of her on the floor of her apartment, felt wrong. Not lighter. It felt almost the same. Clara sat very still and let that thought organize itself. The quilts were heavy. 3 hand-stitched quilts, full-sized, were not nothing. The letters, the photographs, the rosary, those were almost weightless. The chest itself was solid hardwood, which accounted for most of the weight. But she had carried this chest twice today, once from Rosa's living room to the car with Diego, and once from the car to the apartment alone. And both times it had felt roughly the same resistance, the same distribution of weight through her arms and lower back. And now the chest sat here, emptied of everything inside it, and it felt not exactly the same, but close, closer than it should. Clara knelt forward and put her hands on the interior floor of the chest. The wood was smooth, the same dark mahogany as the exterior. She pressed down in the center. She pressed at the corners. She ran her fingers along the seams where the floor met the walls. She pressed again at the left corner nearest her, and then the right. And then she noticed that the distance between the outer bottom of the chest and the interior floor was not proportional to the thickness of a single plank of mahogany. She went and got a ruler from Lily's homework box. The exterior height of the chest was 21 inches. Then the interior height, from the bottom of the inside to the underside of the lid, was 14 inches. She looked at the base of the chest from the outside. 7 inches. A single plank of wood, even thick hardwood, did not account for 7 inches of base. Her hands had gone very still. She remembered what Rosa had said once, sitting in the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon when the children were in the backyard and the light was coming through the window in the slow way of October afternoons. She had not been talking to Clara, not exactly. She had been talking in the direction of the window, the way she sometimes did when she was sorting through something. She had said, "Your great-grandfather believed that a house should have a room no one knows about. Not for hiding, for keeping. There is a difference. A hidden room is shame. A kept room is love." Clara had filed it under the category of lovely things, Rosa said, the category that contained proverbs and half-remembered wisdom and the particular poetry of a woman who had been translating her inner life between 2 languages for 70 years. Now, kneeling on the floor of her apartment with a ruler in her hand and the yellow eviction notice folded in her apron pocket, she took it out of that category and looked at it directly. For keeping. She ran her fingers along the interior floor again, more slowly this time. She pressed, not in the center, but along the edges, in the corners, in the spaces where 2 surfaces met. In the back right corner, beneath where the quilts had been folded and stacked for what might have been decades, she felt something. Not a latch, not a hinge, something smaller. A depression, a barely wider than a fingertip, worn smooth with the same deliberateness as every other surface of this chest. Worn smooth because it had been pressed, many times, by fingers that knew exactly where it was. Clara pressed it. Nothing happened. She pressed it again harder. Still nothing. She sat back on her heels and breathed slowly, and thought about her great-great-grandfather in his shop in Oaxaca, building this chest for his daughter's wedding in 1940. A man who believed that a good thing should be built to last, and that lasting meant being built for someone who would understand it. A man who had probably made hidden compartments before, not for hiding, for keeping, because the kind of man who builds furniture the way other people write letters is the kind of man who understands that form follows meaning, She pressed the depression again, but this time she pressed it while lifting up slightly on the back edge of the interior floor with her other hand. The floor of the chest moved, not the whole thing, not dramatically. A section, perhaps 12 inches by 18 inches, in the back half of the interior, lifted on one edge and revealed darkness. The darkness of a space that had been enclosed and insulated for longer than Clara had been alive. The smell that came up was faint and dry and complex, the way very old things smell, time compressed into something almost sweet. Clara did not reach inside. Not yet. She sat on the floor of her apartment in her waitress uniform, with her children sleeping in the next room and the yellow notice in her pocket, and $312 between herself and the worst version of her life. And she looked at the darkness in the space beneath the false floor of a hope chest that her great-great-grandfather had built in Oaxaca in 1940. And she thought about Rosa saying, "She is the only one who would know what to do with it." She thought about Rosa oiling those hinges, recently enough that they made no sound. She thought about Rosa, who had lived in a small yellow house for 41 years, and worn sensible shoes, and driven a 1998 Buick, and by all outward appearance had very little. And she thought about the way Rosa had always insisted that things were not always what they appeared on the outside, which Clara had always understood as philosophy, and now understood might have been something else entirely. She thought about the depression beneath the quilts, worn smooth by decades of deliberate pressing. She thought about her great-great-grandfather's hands, and what it meant to build something not just to last, but to be found. And then Clara Mendez, 34 years old, 1 month from eviction, with her children sleeping 10 feet away and her whole life contracted to its narrowest point, reached into the hidden space beneath her grandmother's hope chest and touched something cold. Not wood, not stone, metal, smooth and dense and cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Her fingers closed around it. She drew it into the light. It was a coin, about the size of a silver dollar, heavy enough that she felt the weight of it shift in her palm, like something with intention. The surface was worn, but the image still clear. An eagle, wings spread, and surrounded by lettering she could not immediately read in the dim light of her apartment lamp. She turned it over. The other face showed a face in profile, laurel-wreathed, classical in the manner of things that were made when people believed in permanence. She set the coin on the floor in front of her. She reached in again. Another coin, same weight, same feel, same cold. Another. Her hand swept slowly across the floor of the hidden space and found not emptiness, but substance, object after object, surface after surface, the accumulated weight of something she did not yet have a name for. She stopped reaching. She sat with her hand inside the hidden space and her eyes on the ceiling of her apartment, which had a water stain in the corner that the landlord had said he would fix in September and hadn't fixed. And she breathed. Or Rosa had said, "She is the only one who would know what to do with it." Not, "She will love it." Not, "She deserves it." Not, "She needs it." She is the only one who would know what to do with it. Clara looked at the coin in her palm. She looked at the darkness in the chest, which was not empty, which had never been empty, which had been waiting for these hands and these fingers and this specific night. Marco coughed once in the next room, the soft, settled cough of a child deep in sleep, not distress. Clara listened until she heard his breathing resume its rhythm. Lily turned over on the pull-out couch, and the springs creaked and then went quiet. Outside, the city hummed its ordinary nighttime hum. Clara Mendez sat on the floor in front of her grandmother's hope chest, holding a coin she didn't yet know the name of. Joanne felt something shift beneath her, not the floor of the apartment, which was solid enough, but the floor of her life, which had been sliding for 14 months without stopping, and which had, in this moment, for the first time in a long time, simply stopped. She did not know yet what was in that chest, but she was beginning to understand that Rosa had always known. She is the only one who would know what to do with it. Clara reached in again. She worked slowly and with both hands, the way you work when you are not sure what you are touching and are not sure you trust the evidence of your own fingers. The hidden space beneath the false floor was divided, not into one open cavity, the way a chest might be modified by someone in a hurry, but into sections. 3 of them, she determined by touch before her eyes could confirm it, separated by narrow wooden partitions that ran front to back like the dividers in a silverware drawer. Each section held different things. The first, nearest the front, held the coins. The second held something softer, wrapped in layers of chamois leather that had the smell of age and care. The third, at the back of the chest against the far wall, held something flat and dense, paper or cloth, packed with the same deliberateness that governed every other aspect of what Rosa had left behind. Clara took out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The coins were gold. She understood this not from expertise, but from the quality of the light they returned, not the cold shine of silver or the flat gleam of copper, but something warmer, almost reluctant, as if the metal were acknowledging the attention without welcoming it. They were stacked in columns, each column wrapped in a paper sleeve. She counted the columns, 14. She counted the coins in one column, 10. She did not count the others, but the stacking was uniform, and she understood, in a general and not yet specific way, that there were a great many of them. She lifted one into the beam of her flashlight. The coin was large, the size of a 50-cent piece, and heavy in the proportion of something denser than its size suggested. The obverse showed a figure in profile. A woman, she thought, classical with a crown of stars, surrounded by lettering that her phone's light rendered legible. Liberty and a date, 1904. But the reverse showed an eagle with wings spread and a shield on its breast, and lettering that read, $20 and United States of America. At the bottom, almost too small to read without squinting, the letters that every coin collector and every dealer and eventually every journalist who would write about this night would mention in the same breath. A pluribus unum. She set it down. She picked up another. 1897. Another. 1901. Another. 1907. Another. 1899. The dates varied, but the coins were consistent. Same size, same weight, same eagle on the reverse, same woman crowned with stars. They were Liberty Head double eagles, though she would not know that name until the following afternoon. She did not need to know the name to understand that 14 stacks of 10 gold coins, with each coin roughly the size of a large button and weighing roughly an ounce, represented something that did not belong in the category of $40 inheritance. Her hands had stopped shaking. She noticed this with a kind of distant clarity, the way you notice things about your own body when the rest of your mind is occupied elsewhere. She was very calm. The calmness felt like the wrong response, and then felt like the only possible response, because the alternative was a sound that would wake the children, and the children were sleeping. She turned to the second section. The chamois leather was wrapped around something in layers, fold after careful fold, the wrapping itself a kind of argument for the value of what was inside. Clara unwound it slowly. The first layer gave way to a second, slightly thinner, the second to a third, for inside the third layer, nestled in the depression it had occupied long enough to have shaped the leather around it. A brooch. Not a costume brooch. Not the decorative pins she'd seen in Rosa's jewelry box over the years. The enameled flowers, the silver saints, the turquoise pieces from a trip to New Mexico in the 1980s. This was something different in weight and quality and intention. The setting was yellow gold, intricate, mill-grain edged in the manner of things made by hand for people who expected them to last. At its center, a stone, deep green. Emerald, she thought, though she told herself not to assume, told herself to slow down and not project meaning onto an object she couldn't yet properly read. But the stone caught the flashlight beam and returned it differently than glass or paste ever had, with a depth that suggested structure rather than surface, and she set the brooch on the floor beside the coins and unwrapped the next piece. A ring. Yellow gold. A cluster of stones. She counted 5. That her phone's light turned into sparks. She turned it over and found a mark on the inside of the band. A hallmark, tiny and precise, and beside it, a maker's mark she could not decipher without better light, and probably without research. She set it beside the brooch. Another piece, wrapped separately. A necklace, gold chain, a pendant that held a single oval stone the color of a stormy sea, gray-green, translucent. She held it up in the light, and the stone seemed to collect the beam and hold it for a moment before releasing it. Slowly, like a sigh. Piece after piece. 7 in total, each wrapped individually, each set on the floor beside its neighbors, until Clara sat surrounded by a semicircle of objects that had no business existing in the apartment she was 30 days from losing. She turned to the third section. What she found there was flat and rectangular, wrapped first in oilcloth and then in a layer of wax paper, both sealed at the edges with a careful hand. She peeled the wax paper back and found documents. Not a large number, perhaps 20 pages in total, but they had been organized with the same care applied to everything else in this chest, which meant each page was protected and each placement was deliberate. On top was an envelope. The envelope bore her name in Rosa's handwriting, not the shaky cursive of the last years, but something older, steadier. The hand of a woman who had written this before the tremors came and had then sealed it and placed it where she knew it would be found. The ink had faded slightly at the edges. The envelope had been in this chest for some time. Clara set it aside. She was not ready to open it. She needed to understand the shape of the whole thing before she could receive whatever Rosa had left in that envelope. And she understood this about herself, the way you understand things about yourself at 2 a.m. when there is no one else to ask. She looked at what was beneath the envelope. The documents were a mixture. Some were handwritten in Spanish, on paper that had aged to cream. Some were typed, in English, on paper from a later era, the 1970s, she guessed, from the typeface and the texture. And some were neither handwritten nor typed, but printed on heavy stock that looked like certificates, bearing stamps and seals and dates that she could not fully decode in the dim light of her phone. She picked up one of the certificates. It was approximately 8 inches by 10 inches, printed on paper the color of old ivory, with engraved borders in a pattern of interlocking scroll work. In the center, text, bearer bond. Below that, a number. To the right of the number, a $sign. To the right of the $sign, $5,000. She counted the certificates. There were 11 of them. Then she sat on the floor and did not move for approximately 3 minutes. After those 3 minutes, she picked up the envelope with her name on it and opened it. Rosa's handwriting was the steadier version, the pre-tremor version, and the letter was dated 4 years earlier. 4 years before Rosa's death, which meant she had written it, sealed it, and placed it in the chest when she was 83 years old, and had apparently understood, with the clarity of someone who has thought carefully about the end of things, exactly what needed to be said and to whom. "My Clara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you found the mechanism in the corner, which means you did what I always believed you would do. You paid attention. The others look at a thing and see its surface. You look at a thing and wonder about its depth. I have watched you do this your whole life, with books, with people, with Marco and Lily, who will become who they are, partly because of the way you see them. I am not surprised you are the one holding this letter. I am glad. I need to explain some things. Your great-great-grandfather Eduardo built this chest in 1940. He was a carpenter by trade, but a craftsman by nature, which is a distinction that mattered to him. He built things to last. He also built things to hold things safely, by which I mean he believed that what a person truly valued should have a place that was not visible to anyone who did not already know it existed. This was practical in Oaxaca in 1940. It remained practical in San Francisco for reasons that will become clear. When your great-grandfather Arturo and I came to this country in 1954, we brought the chest and very little else. We were not poor by temperament, poor by circumstance, which is different, though not everyone makes the distinction. We understood that we would have to build everything from nothing, and that this was not a tragedy, but simply the conditions we had been given to work with. Arturo found work quickly. I found work also. In those years, I worked for a woman named Mrs. Eleanor Hartfield, who lived in Pacific Heights and had more rooms in her house than she had reasons to enter them. She needed alterations, and I did them. She was a difficult woman in many ways, but fair in one specific way. She paid exactly what a thing was worth, not a cent more, but not a cent less either. After some months, she began paying me differently, not always in cash. She had pieces of jewelry she no longer wore, old coins her husband had collected, and which she had no interest in after he died, and she preferred to settle accounts with these objects rather than with checks, which she found tedious. I accepted. I did not know at the time that this was unusual or particularly fortunate. I only knew that the things she gave me were real, heavy in the hand, cold in the way that genuine things are cold, and that I understood instinctively that they were worth keeping. Over the years, I developed what I can only call an instinct for valuable things. Not an education in them. I never studied jewelry or numismatics or the bond market in any formal way. But I paid attention. I listened when customers talked. I read what was available to read. I learned what a real stone felt like compared to glass, what gold smelled like when it was genuine, what coins from certain eras meant to certain people. And I kept adding to what was in that chest, not recklessly. Carefully, over 50 years, The way you build anything that is meant to last. I did not put these things in a bank. I want to explain this because your generation trusts banks in a way that my generation did not. And with reason, your generation did not watch what I watched. I came from a country where what you had could be taken by people in positions of authority if you were not careful about where it was stored. I arrived in a country that was better in this regard, but not perfect. And I had Arturo's caution, and my own mother's caution, and my grandmother's caution all inside me. And they said, keep what is real in a place that is real. Keep it where you can touch it. Keep it where it cannot be made to disappear with a signature on a paper you were never shown. So I kept it here. I am not a wealthy woman in the way people understand wealth. I have never lived as though I had what is in this chest, and I will not begin now. But I am not a poor woman either. What is in that chest is yours, Clara. All of it. I have attached documents that will help you understand what each piece is and where it came from, to the extent that I could verify those things. There are also instructions for a woman named Dr. Irene Solis, who has an office on Sacramento Street, and who does appraisals, and knows how to be discreet. Give her my name. She will know what to do. I am giving this to you, and not to the others, for reasons I will not insult you by making elaborate. You know the reasons. You showed up. You showed up every week for 2 years, when showing up was inconvenient, and you showed up not because you expected anything, but because you understood that love requires presence, not intention. Like I have watched you love your children with a fierceness that costs you, and I have watched you refuse to let that cost diminish you, and I have watched you struggle in ways you believe no one has noticed. I noticed. I noticed everything, mija. Go see Dr. Solis. Do not tell the others until you understand what you have. Come back to the chest. There is a second mechanism on the underside of the left partition, the middle section. Press up, not down. I love you more than I knew how to say in any language I had. Rosa Clara read the letter twice. She read it a third time. Then she set it on the floor beside the coins and the jewelry and the bearer bond certificates, and she looked at all of it together in the light of her phone for a long moment before she turned her face toward the ceiling and let what was inside her chest finally move, which it did. In silence, her hands pressed flat against the floor, her breathing careful and deliberate and completely inadequate for what she was feeling. She pressed up on the underside of the left partition. The second compartment opened in the opposite direction from the first. The partition itself swung down on a concealed hinge, revealing a space roughly the same dimensions as the others, but shallower, no more than 3 inches deep, lined with a material that felt like velvet and had faded to a color that might once have been burgundy. Inside this compartment, flat and organized in rows with the precision of someone who understood their value, were glassine envelopes. Small, clear, each one sealed, for each one holding a stamp or a set of stamps, positioned with the careful orientation of someone who knew that even the smallest mishandling degraded value. Clara counted the envelopes. 31. She lifted one and brought it close to her phone's light. The stamp inside was small and rectangular, in colors that the years had not dulled. A deep carmine red, an image that resolved under scrutiny into an early biplane above a landscape. She could make out the denomination. 24 cents. She could make out the word airmail. She could make out, just barely, the fact that the biplane in the image was printed upside down relative to the frame. She knew enough, from years of working in a school library, and from the particular quality of curiosity she'd applied to every subject that crossed her path, to know that an upside-down airplane on an early American airmail stamp was not an ordinary printing variation. She set the envelope down very carefully on the velvet. She looked at the 30 remaining envelopes. Then she wrapped everything back in chamois and oilcloth and wax paper, replaced the false floor, restacked Rosa's quilts, latched the lid, and sat on the floor next to the closed chest until the quality of the darkness outside her window began to change from night to very early morning, which was when she finally stood up, went to the kitchen, made coffee she did not particularly want, and began to plan. Dr. Irene Solis had an office on Sacramento Street between a dental practice and a framing shop, for in a building whose exterior gave no indication of what happened inside. Clara had called at 8 in the morning and identified herself as Rosa Mendez's granddaughter, and the woman who answered, not Dr. Solis herself, but someone who worked for her, had gone quiet for a moment, in the way people go quiet when a name matters, and then said, "Can you come in at noon?" She left the children with her neighbor Mrs. Farrokhzad, who was 71, and watched telenovelas, and adored Marco and Lily, and never asked questions Clara wasn't offering to answer. She put the coins, the jewelry, 3 of the bearer bond certificates, and 1 of the glassine stamp envelopes into a canvas tote bag that had previously held library books, and drove to Sacramento Street with the kind of focused attention she normally reserved for driving in bad weather. Dr. Irene Solis was 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back and glasses on a chain, and the manner of someone who had seen a great many things and had organized her reactions accordingly. She received Clara in a back office that smelled of beeswax and old paper, and had shelves along 2 walls holding reference volumes whose spines were worn with use. She shook Clara's hand with both of hers, a gesture that registered as something more than professional courtesy, and said, "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman." Clara said, "I'm beginning to understand that." She set the canvas bag on Dr. Solis's desk. She removed the items one by one and placed them on the felt-lined tray that Dr. Solis had positioned between them. She was watching Dr. Solis's face, and Dr. Solis was watching the objects, and Clara learned something in those first minutes about what true professional composure looked like. It looked like stillness in the presence of things that warranted movement. Dr. Solis examined the first coin through a loop she produced from her desk drawer. She turned it once, twice. She set it on a small scale. She noted the weight. She examined the date and the mint mark, a tiny letter beneath the eagle's tail feathers that Clara had not noticed. She set the coin down and picked up a second one, then a third. Then she set down the loop and looked at Clara directly for the first time since the objects had appeared on the tray. "These are Liberty Head double eagles," she said. $20 gold coins minted between 1877 and 1907. Your grandmother had a strong preference for uncirculated or near uncirculated examples. She tapped the nearest coin with one fingertip. This one, the 1904, is EMS 63 by my initial assessment, possibly 64. The 1907 here is likely MS 65. She picked up the one Clara had first held in her hands, the 1897. "This one," she said, and paused. "I'd need to send it for professional grading, but if I'm reading the surfaces correctly, this may be MS 66. That's rare for the series, Clara said. What does that mean in terms of value? Dr. Solis said, individually, depending on grade, these range from approximately $800 to upward of $6,000 per coin. The rarer dates in the highest grades command more. I would need to assess all of them to give you an accurate total. But she looked at the 14 stacks Clara had described. If the rest are comparable to what I'm seeing, you are looking at somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 in the coins alone. Clara heard the numbers, the way you hear numbers in a dream, with the partial comprehension of someone who understands the words, but is still negotiating their relationship to the reality they describe. Dr. Solis moved to the jewelry. The brooch held an emerald of approximately 4 carats, she said. Colombian origin, based on the inclusions. She was looking through the loupe again. And the clarity is exceptional. The setting is French, early 20th century, Edwardian period. She examined the marks on the band of the ring. This is English hallmarked, she said. London, 1889. The stones are old mine-cut diamonds. She said the word diamonds with no more inflection than she might say weather or Tuesday, which Clara found both calming and profoundly disorienting. The necklace pendant, she determined after several minutes of examination, held a alexandrite of unusual quality, a stone that appeared green in the daylight, coming through the office window, and shifted, when Dr. Solis held it under an incandescent lamp, to a deep rose red. A color change stone of that saturation, she said. Do you know what alexandrite is? Clara said she'd heard of it. Dr. Solis said, it's one of the rarest gemstones in existence. A natural alexandrite of this quality and size, she measured it with calipers, is not a piece you see every day. This piece alone is significant. She examined all 7 jewelry pieces. She wrote numbers in a notebook. Clara could not read the notebook from across the desk and did not try. When Dr. Solis finished, she set her pen down and said, the jewelry collectively is in the range of $300,000 to $400,000 at conservative auction estimate, possibly higher depending on provenance and condition of documentation. Clara said, what about the stamps? She had placed the single glassine envelope on the tray when she arrived, face down, and Dr. Solis had not yet touched it. She reached for it now and lifted it with 2 fingers at the edge. The way you handle something that you know requires that particular carefulness, and turned it over and looked through the glassine at what was inside and was quiet for a full 30 seconds. Then she said, where did Rosa get this? Clara said she didn't know yet. She had letters to read. Dr. Solis said, this is an inverted Jenny. It's a 1918 United States airmail stamp, for 24 cents, with the Curtis Jenny biplane printed inverted. Only 1 sheet of 100 was ever found, and the stamps have been distributed and sold over the decades. There are fewer than 100 known examples in existence. A single example sold at auction several years ago for over $1 million. Clara's mouth was open. She became aware of this and closed it. Dr. Solis said, I would need to examine the others. Clara said, there are 30 more envelopes. Dr. Solis set down the glassine envelope and looked at Clara with an expression that Clara would later describe to herself as the look of someone recalibrating, as if a measurement had come back significantly different from the expected value, and the instrument was sound, and the measurement was simply true. She said, would you like some water? Clara said yes, so she drank the water. She let Dr. Solis continue to talk. The bearer bond certificates, Dr. Solis explained in the measured cadence of someone who understood that the person across from her needed information delivered at a manageable pace, were Series EE United States savings bonds issued in the 1970s and fully matured, having been held past their 30-year maturity date. The interest they'd accumulated since maturity would require a treasury calculation, but the face value of 11 $5,000 bonds was $55,000, and the accrued interest would bring that considerably higher. Dr. Solis said, "Your grandmother kept records." She slid one of the handwritten documents across the desk. "This appears to be a detailed accounting of each acquisition: date, source, amount paid or received, and her assessment of value at the time of acquisition. It goes back to 1961. Clara looked at the document. 60 years of careful accounting. 60 years of paying attention. 60 years of a woman who wore sensible shoes and drove a 1998 Buick and accepted payment in objects rather than checks from a difficult woman in Pacific Heights, and then kept paying attention and kept acquiring and kept placing things in a chest that her father had built in a carpenter shop in Oaxaca in 1940. For keeping, she had said, not for hiding, for keeping." Dr. Solis said, "I'll need several days with all of the items to give you a complete assessment, and I would recommend," she said this carefully, in the tone of someone who is about to suggest something that carries weight, "that you speak with an attorney before you speak with anyone else. Well, not about the items themselves, but about how to proceed. An inheritance of this nature, even if the bequest itself is simple and uncontested, will attract attention, and attention is easier to manage when you are prepared for it." Clara said, "How much are we talking about in total?" Dr. Solis was quiet for a moment. She looked at her notebook. She looked at the items on the tray. She looked at Clara. She said, "To complete the assessment properly, I'll need to examine all 31 of the stamp envelopes, all of the coins, and all of the jewelry. And the bonds require a separate process. But based on what I have in front of me right now, I would estimate, conservatively, that the contents of that chest have a total value somewhere between $2 and $3 million. Possibly higher, depending on the stamps." So Clara set her water glass down. She said, "My family gave it to me at the will reading because it was appraised at $40. Dr. Solis said, "Estate appraisers assess visible contents. No one opened the false bottom." Clara said, "No. No one did." She drove home in the early afternoon in her 2009 Honda Civic with 211,000 miles and a heater that worked on one side. She drove past the same storefronts and the same lit windows of other people's apartments that she had driven past the night before. But they looked different now, or she looked at them differently, or perhaps the difference was inside her and had nothing to do with the storefronts at all. She sat in the parking lot for a while, not out of grief this time, but out of the need to let something settle before she carried it inside. Oh, she thought about Rosa in the small yellow house for 41 years. She thought about Rosa oiling the hinges of a chest that she intended to remain silent. She thought about Rosa writing a letter in her steady pre-tremor hand at 83 years old, placing it in an envelope with Clara's name on it, sealing the compartment, replacing the quilts, carrying the knowledge of what was inside through 4 more years of Sundays and tortillas and embroidery lessons and stories about Oaxaca, and never saying a word. She thought about what it cost, over 60 years, to keep a secret of that size and that weight, to sit across from people who believed they understood your circumstances and let them continue to believe it, not from deception, but from the particular privacy of a woman who understood that what you have is not your worth and that what you keep is not what you are. She thought about Diego saying, "She always did have a soft spot for you, Clara." She thought about Renata saying $40 with that particular pleasure. Her phone buzzed. A text from Diego. "Hey, just checking in. How are you holding up? Let us know if you need anything." She looked at the text for a long time. She did not respond. Not yet. She called instead the one person she had allowed herself to call. Her friend Priya, who had been her closest friend since their library science program in graduate school, and who was now a reference librarian in the East Bay, and who had the specific gift of hearing impossible news and responding to it, not with noise, but with the quiet of someone reorganizing themselves around new information. Clara said, "Priya, I need to tell you something." Priya said, "Okay," Clara told her. "All of it. The will reading, the $40, the false floor, the coins, the jewelry, the stamps, Dr. Solis's office, the number $2 to $3 million. She told it in order without editorializing, the way you tell something when you are still in the early stages of believing it yourself. When she finished, Priya was quiet for 7 or 8 seconds. Then she said, "Rosa." Just the name. As a complete sentence. Clara said, "I know." Priya said, "Have you told anyone else?" Clara said no. Rosa's letter said not to, until she understood what she had. Priya said, "Good. Keep it that way for now." And Clara? Rosa was right about you. She was always right about you. Clara said, she left a second mechanism on the partition. Said, "Press up, not down." Priya said, "Of course she did." Clara went inside, where Mrs. Farrokhzad had made tea, and Marco had fallen asleep in the armchair, and Lily had drawn a picture of the hope chest, which she'd been thinking about all day, and which she'd rendered in careful crayon detail, with the marigold carving along the border and the iron latch, and a figure kneeling in front of it that was recognizably Clara. Clara looked at the drawing for a long time. She said, "Lily, this is beautiful." Lily said, "I tried to make the flowers look right, the ones on the chest." Clara said, "You did. No, you got them exactly right." That evening, after the children were in bed and the apartment was quiet, Clara sat on the floor in front of the hope chest again. She opened it. She lifted the quilts. She pressed the corner mechanism and raised the false floor. She put the coins and jewelry and documents back in their places, and lowered the floor and replaced the quilts and latched the lid. Then she sat with her back against the chest and looked at the yellow eviction notice she had unfolded and smoothed on the coffee table in front of her. 30 days. 30 days was enough time. She thought about Rosa walking through the door of a difficult woman's house in Pacific Heights in 1956, with a needle and thread, and no expectation of what the next 60 years would produce, only the intention to do the work in front of her well enough that it led to the next piece of work. She thought about Rosa pressing that corner mechanism for the first time, not to retrieve anything, but simply to check that it was still there, that what she had built and was building remained intact and real and waiting. She thought about the word keeping, not hiding, keeping. There was a difference, Rosa had understood, between concealing something from shame and preserving something from love, between a secret that diminishes the keeper and a gift that honors them. between burying a thing and planting it. Rosa had planted something 60 years ago. She had watered it in quiet, tended it in private, and left it to be found by the person she trusted to understand not just what it was, but what it meant. Clara understood. She would not spend the following days in a state of visible transformation. She would not call Diego. She would not call Patricia. She would not respond to Renata's text, which arrived the following morning with the particular energy of someone who had been thinking about $40. "Hey, let me know if you decide to sell the chest. My friend does estate sales, and he's pretty good." Clara read the text and set her phone face down on the kitchen counter and made Lily's lunch and helped Marco find his left shoe and sent them both to school with the same face she wore every morning, which was the face of a woman managing the day in front of her. She called the attorney Dr. Solis had recommended. His name was Mr. Victor Huang, and he had a quiet office in the Sunset District, and the manner of someone accustomed to navigating the space between significant value and appropriate process. Clara explained the situation. He asked careful questions. He said, "Don't move any of the items until I've had a chance to review the will and the documentation." He said, "This is straightforward legally. A bequest is a bequest. But we want to ensure the paperwork is airtight before anything becomes public knowledge." He said, "Your grandmother was clearly very thoughtful." Clara said, "Yes, she was." She did not tell Diego that day or the day after. She went to Dr. Solis's office on the third day with the remaining items from the chest, the 30 additional stamp envelopes, and the rest of the coins and the final jewelry pieces, and she sat in the waiting area while Dr. Solis worked in the back room, and the minutes moved the way minutes move when the world has shifted beneath you, and you are still learning the new footing. Dr. Solis came out in the late afternoon. She sat across from Clara and set her notebook on the desk between them and spoke in the even, organized manner that Clara had come to rely on as an anchor. "The stamps," she said. "Of the 31 inverted Jenny examples your grandmother held, 28 are in condition grades ranging from fine to very fine. One is extremely fine. 2 are in a condition that, to my knowledge, has not been documented among known examples. They appear to be original gum, never hinged, with the deepest color saturation I've seen in this series." She paused. Individual inverted Jennies have sold at auction for between $500,000 and over $1 million per stamp, depending on condition and provenance. Your grandmother's examples, given their quality and the unusual completeness of this group, 31 stamps from a single sheet of 100 is unprecedented in the known record, could command significantly more, particularly given the documentation she kept about their origin. Clara said, "Where did she get them?" Dr. Solis opened one of the handwritten documents. "A customer," she said, 1963. A woman named Margaret Aldrich, who had inherited a collection from her father and had no interest in maintaining it. She paid Rosa for alterations to a wardrobe of clothing after her husband's death. Rosa's entry here, she turned the page toward Clara, reads, "Mrs. Aldrich settled remainder of account with items from husband's stamp collection. Small envelopes. She said they were old and she didn't want them. I looked at them carefully. I believe they may be valuable. I'm keeping them." Rosa had written, "I believe they may be valuable. I am keeping them." In 1963, 60 years ago, in a small alterations shop in San Francisco, a woman from Oaxaca had looked at a glassine envelope held by a widow who wanted to be rid of it, and had understood something. Had paid attention in the way she always paid attention, which was completely and without assumption, and had written 4 sentences in a notebook with the same precision she brought to everything, and had placed the envelopes in a chest and pressed the corner mechanism and replaced the quilts. For keeping. Dr. Solis said, "The total assessed value of all items in the chest is between $3 and $4 million. The stamps alone account for the upper end of that range. Given provenance, rarity, and the current collector market, I would not be surprised if auction results exceeded $4 million. She said this with the same tone she had said everything else, because she was a professional, and this was her work. And then she said, in a slightly different tone, "Your grandmother was extraordinary." Clara said, "She wore sensible shoes." Dr. Solis looked at her. Clara said, "She drove a 1998 Buick. She had a fig tree and a herb garden. She spent her last years letting my children put flour on the ceiling." Dr. Solis said, "Yes. And she left her granddaughter $4 million in a $40 chest because she trusted her to be the person who would know what to do with it." Clara folded her hands on the desk in front of her. Outside the window on Sacramento Street, the afternoon traffic moved past in the ordinary way of ordinary afternoons, which had no idea what was happening inside this building, which was that a woman's life was reorganizing itself around a truth that had been waiting patiently for her in a dark and carefully maintained space for as long as she had been alive. She said, "I need to call my attorney." She said, "And then I need to take my kids to dinner somewhere that isn't the diner." Dr. Solis smiled, for the first time since Clara had walked through the door. She said, "There's a good place around the corner. The soup is excellent." Clara said, "That sounds exactly right." She gathered her things and walked out onto Sacramento Street and stood on the sidewalk in the October afternoon light, which was the particular gold of San Francisco October, low and warm and briefly forgiving, and she breathed it in and thought about Rosa at 83 years old, sealing an envelope with steady hands, writing Clara's name in the letters that come before a tremor takes them. "Come back to the chest," Rosa had written. "There is a second mechanism." There is always a second mechanism, Clara thought, if you are the kind of person who pays attention. She started walking toward the restaurant. She called Priya as she walked. Priya answered on the second ring. Clara said, "4 million. Maybe more." Priya said, "Rosa." Just the name. Again. A complete sentence that contained everything. Clara said, "I know." She stopped at the corner and waited for the light. Around her, people moved in the purposeful directions of late afternoon, carrying the ordinary weight of ordinary days. In her canvas tote bag were copies of documents that her attorney had already begun reviewing. In her phone were voicemails from Diego, 3 of them now, growing incrementally more specific in their curiosity, as though some frequency had shifted somewhere, and he could feel it without yet being able to name it. She had not returned the calls. She would. Soon. But first she needed to eat soup around the corner from Dr. Solis's office and sit for an hour in a place where no one needed anything from her, and the weight of what had happened could simply be what it was, and without explanation or defense, or the performance of a reaction appropriate to an audience she hadn't invited. The light changed. Clara Mendez walked forward into the afternoon, into the particular future that a woman in Oaxaca had begun building for her 60 years before she was born, and she carried it lightly. The way you carry something when you finally understand, it was always meant for you. Diego called for the 4th time on a Thursday morning, while Clara was sitting at her kitchen table, with Mr. Huang's paperwork spread in front of her and Lily's cereal bowl still in the sink, and the yellow eviction notice pinned beneath a coffee mug in the corner of the counter. She let it ring. She watched her phone the way you watch something that is not yet urgent enough to require action, but is moving steadily in that direction. Then she answered. Diego said, "Clara, hey. I've been trying to reach you. Are you okay?" She said, "I'm fine, Diego. I've been busy," he said. "Yeah, of course, I understand. He paused in the way he always paused when he was approaching something he had not quite decided how to say. "I wanted to make sure you were doing okay. After everything with Abuela, it's a hard time." She said, "It is," he said. "Listen, I also wanted to mention, and this isn't pressure, this is just me thinking out loud, but there's a buyer interested in Abuela's house, moving quickly. They want to close in 60 days, and the offer is strong. I'm going to move forward with it. Obviously, it's my call, but I wanted you to know." Clara said, "Okay," he said. "And if you ever want to come by the house before we close, to see if there's anything you want, our furniture or whatever, just let me know." She said, "I'll keep that in mind," he said. "Also, Renata mentioned you hadn't been in touch. She was asking about the chest. I think she knows someone who might," Clara said. "The chest is fine, Diego. I'm taking care of it." There was a pause that had a texture to it, the texture of a man recalibrating without knowing why. He said, "Okay, great. Just checking. Call me if you need anything." She said, "I will." She set the phone down and looked at the paperwork. Mr. Huang had been efficient and thorough. The bequest was clean. Rosa's will was unambiguous. The items were legally Clara's by every standard that applied. And the documentation Rosa had kept over 60 years was, in Mr. Huang's assessment, remarkably complete for a private collection of this nature. There would be tax considerations, and there would be process. None of it was simple, but all of it was navigable, and Mr. Huang had navigated it before on behalf of people who had come to his quiet office in the Sunset District, carrying things they hadn't expected to be carrying. Clara had one decision to make before the week was out, and it was not about money. The money, in the abstract sense of its existence and its approximate size, had settled into something she could hold without shaking. What had not settled was the question of how to carry the truth of it into the relationships she already had. The brother who had carried a $40 chest to her car, with the indifference of a man who had already decided it didn't matter. The aunt who had examined her fingernails during the will reading. The cousin who had said the number slowly and with pleasure. Rosa had said, "Do not tell the others until you understand what you have." Clara understood what she had now. She thought about the instruction carefully. Rosa had not said, "Do not tell the others at all." She had said, "Wait until you understand." The distinction was Rosa's kind of precision, not a command toward secrecy, but a reminder that clarity should precede disclosure. You could not explain a thing well from inside your own surprise. You could not hold your ground in a conversation you hadn't yet had with yourself. Clara had now had that conversation with herself for 10 days. She was ready. She called Diego back 7 minutes after hanging up. He answered on the first ring, which told her he had been holding the phone. She said, "Diego, I need to tell you something about Abuela's chest. Can you come over Saturday morning? Bring Patricia if she wants to come, and tell Renata if she's around." He said, "Is everything okay?" She said, "Everything is fine. I just think you should hear this in person." Saturday arrived with the particular gray softness of a San Francisco November morning, the kind of sky that is not threatening but isn't making any promises either. Clara had cleaned the apartment, not frantically, but thoroughly, the way you prepare a space when you want it to reflect a version of yourself you have chosen. The hope chest sat against the wall beneath the window, the marigold carving catching what thin light came through. She had set out coffee and the pan dulce she'd driven across the city to buy from the bakery on 24th Street that Rosa had loved, and the smell of it in the small apartment was both grief and comfort, in the exact proportion that Rosa had always managed to make those things coexist. Lily and Marco were at Priya's house for the morning. Diego arrived first, in a jacket that cost more than Clara's car payment. Patricia arrived 4 minutes later, in the particular manner of a woman who has decided in advance to be reasonable. Renata came with her mother, which Clara had not expected, and stood in the doorway of the apartment, with the slightly displaced look of someone who had imagined a different kind of space and was adjusting to this one. They sat. Clara poured coffee. She set out the pan dulce without comment. Patricia took a piece and said, "This is from Rosa's place, isn't it?" It was not a question. Clara said yes, but Patricia looked at the pan dulce for a moment and then looked away. Clara sat down across from them. She said, "I want to tell you about Abuela Rosa's hope chest." She said it without preamble, without softening, because Rosa had not been a woman who softened things that were true, and Clara had decided to honor that. She told them about the false floor. She watched Diego's expression shift from attentive to uncertain. She told them about the coins, and his expression shifted further, into a territory she didn't have a precise name for, but recognized as the look of someone revising a prior assessment in real time. She told them about the jewelry, and Patricia set down her coffee cup. She told them about Rosa's letter and read one passage aloud, the part about showing up, about love requiring presence and not just intention. And the room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something true has been said in a space too small to contain it comfortably. Then she told them about the stamps. She said, 31 inverted jennies, a stamp that sold at auction several years ago for over $1 million per example. Rosa kept 31 of them in a glassine envelope in a hidden compartment in the chest that everyone in this family believed was worth $40. Renata said, "What?" Clara said, "Dr. Irene Solis on Sacramento Street has been assessing the collection for the past 10 days. Her current estimate for the total contents of the chest is between $3 and $4 million. Possibly more, depending on how the stamps perform at auction." She looked at Renata when she said the number, not with cruelty, but with the directness of a woman who had decided that what was true deserved to be said, looking at the people it was most relevant to. The room held the number for a moment. Diego said, "Clara," she said. "I'm not finished." He closed his mouth. She said, "Rosa left me the chest because she trusted me to know what to do with it." She wrote that in the will, and she wrote it again in a letter she placed inside the chest 4 years ago. She knew what was in it. She knew what it was worth. She chose to leave it to me specifically, and she chose not to explain why to the rest of the family, because Rosa was a woman who did not feel that her choices required a defense. She paused. She said, "I'm not telling you this to make anyone feel bad. I'm telling you because you're family, and this is the truth, and Rosa deserved to have her full story known by the people who said they loved her. She was not a woman with nothing. She was a woman who built something extraordinary over 60 years without any of us knowing, and she did it quietly, and she dressed modestly, and she drove that Buick, and she made tortillas with the kids, and she never once gave any of us reason to suspect she was anything other than what she appeared to be, because she understood something about worth that had nothing to do with how much you showed. Patricia said, very quietly. She never said a word. Clara said, "No." She never did. The room breathed. Diego looked at his hands. He was not a bad man. Clara had never thought he was a bad man. He was a man who understood the world through a particular lens, who had organized his sense of value around visible things, and who was now sitting in his divorced sister's small apartment, eating pan dulce from a bakery Rosa had loved, understanding that he had missed something significant for a very long time. The thing about people who are not bad, but are wrong, is that when they finally see it, they don't argue. They just go quiet, and the quiet is its own kind of reckoning. He said, "What are you going to do?" Clara said. "I'm going to pay my rent." She said it plainly, without drama. "I'm going to pay Marco's doctor and get him the medication he needs. I'm going to take Lily somewhere she hasn't been before. Somewhere with mountains, or coastline, or both. I'm going to buy a car whose heater works on both sides. And then," she said, "I'm going to figure out the rest slowly, because Rosa did everything slowly and deliberately, and it produced something extraordinary, and I think that's worth paying attention to." Renata said, "I didn't know." Her voice had lost its earlier texture. She said, "I didn't know what was in there." Clara said, "I know you didn't. None of us did. That was Rosa's decision, and it was the right one." Renata looked at the hope chest against the wall. She looked at the marigold carving. She said, "It's beautiful. I never really looked at it before." Clara said, "I know. I didn't either. Not really. Until now." Patricia said, "She was always so careful with things, with money, with words. I used to think it was just how she was, growing up without much. I didn't understand that it was..." She stopped. That it was intentional. That it was a whole system. Clara said, 60 years. That's how long she kept the accounting ledger. Every acquisition, every date, every source, everything documented in her handwriting in a notebook, she kept in the same compartment as the letter with my name on it. Diego said, "And she never told anyone." Clara said, "She told me. In the only way she could be sure it would be understood. She left it for me to find." The room went quiet again, but differently this time. Not the quiet of numbers being absorbed, the quiet of something being felt, of a woman in Oaxaca in 1940 and a carpenter's hands and a chest that traveled 4,000 miles and sat in a pale yellow house for 41 years and held everything that one woman found worth keeping, and the granddaughter who had come every Sunday, who had stayed when everyone else found reasons not to, who had learned the weight of the chest from carrying it, and who had noticed, simply noticed, that the empty chest was not as light as it should have been. "Attention," Rosa had written. "You paid attention. The others look at a thing and see its surface." Diego left an hour later with the careful dignity of a man making peace with the distance between who he had been and who he intended to be. He hugged Clara at the door, genuinely, and she let him, because she had not come to this morning to deepen any division, but to close one. Patricia took the last piece of pan dulce wrapped in a napkin and said, "I should have visited more." She said it to the floor, not to Clara, which was fine. Some admissions are not for the person who receives them. Some are for the person who makes them. Renata paused in the doorway. She looked at Clara with an expression Clara had not previously seen on her face, which was uncertainty stripped of its performance. She said, "The thing I said at the attorney's office, about the $40. Clara said, "It's okay, Renata." Renata said, "It's not." Clara said, "No, but it's forgiven. Rosa would have forgiven it immediately, which is more than I can promise, but I'm working on it." Renata nodded. She looked at the chest one more time. She said, "I'm glad she had you." Clara said, "She had all of us." Renata shook her head slightly. She said, "Not the same way." Then she left, and Clara closed the door and stood in her apartment alone with the pan dulce crumbs and the coffee cups and the hope chest against the wall and the thin November light coming through the window. And she breathed slowly in the particular quiet of a room that has held something large and then released it. She went and knelt in front of the chest. She opened it. She lifted the quilts and set them beside her, one by one. The deep reds and oranges, the faded morning blues, the diamond pattern wedding quilt that Rosa's mother had made. She lifted them with both hands and set them gently on the floor, and then sat looking at the closed false floor and the iron latch and the marigold carving along the edges, all of it exactly as her great-great-grandfather Eduardo had made it in 1940, his hands moving across the wood until something beautiful appeared where there had been nothing. She reached in and pressed the corner mechanism. The false floor rose. She did not take anything out. She just looked at it. The columns of coins in their paper sleeves, the chamois leather bundles, each fold deliberate, the glassine envelopes organized in their rows, the oilcloth and wax paper with the documents Rosa had kept for 60 years, all of it real and present and quietly extraordinary, sitting in the bottom of a chest that a woman had carried across a border in 1954, because some things you carry, not because they are easy to carry, but because they are yours. For keeping, not hiding. Keeping. Clara lowered the false floor. She replaced the quilts. She closed the lid and latched it. Then she sat on the floor with her back against the chest and her hands in her lap and thought about Rosa at 87, in the bed in the small yellow house with the fig tree in the yard, nor in the last hours of a life that had been lived with the particular completeness of someone who had done what they came to do. She thought about the Sunday mornings, the tortillas and the stories, and the embroidery lessons, and the way Rosa had looked at Marco when he put flour on the ceiling, not with exasperation, but with the expression of a woman adding something to an internal collection of things worth keeping. She thought about the way Rosa said "mija," which was not a word, but a whole posture toward another person, the posture of someone who sees you correctly and is not going to stop. She thought about what it meant that Rosa had trusted her with this, not just with the money, though the money was real and significant and was going to change the specific shape of her children's futures in ways she had not let herself hope for in over a year. But with the knowledge, with the story, with the 60-year accounting ledger and the letter written in steady pre-tremor cursive, and the second mechanism on the left partition, press up, not down, because Rosa had understood that some people stop at the first discovery and some keep looking. Clara had kept looking. She was going to keep looking. That was, she understood now, what Rosa had been trying to tell her. Not just about the chest, but about the broader habit. The practice of paying attention past the surface of things, of not accepting the visible as the complete, of understanding that worth is not always legible from outside, and that a thing appraised at $40 by someone who doesn't know where to press is still worth what it's worth. The phone rang. It was Priya. Priya said, "How did it go?" Clara said, "Diego was quiet for a long time. Patricia took the last pan dulce. Renata said she was glad Rosa had me." Priya said, "And?" Clara said, "And I think we're okay. Not fixed, but okay. Family is like the chest, maybe. There are layers you don't see until you're in the right position and paying the right kind of attention." Priya said, "That is a very Rosa thing to say." Clara said, "I know. I think she's still talking." The months that followed moved in the rhythm of process rather than event. Mr. Huang filed the necessary paperwork. Dr. Solis completed her assessment and connected Clara with 2 auction specialists, one in New York for the stamps, one in San Francisco for the coins and jewelry, who came to her apartment, which seemed briefly and improbably small for the work that was happening inside it, and examined Rosa's collection with the focused attention of people for whom excellence in their field meant understanding that extraordinary things existed in ordinary containers. The inverted Jenny stamps were authenticated and cataloged. The auction house confirmed that 31 examples from a single source, with documented provenance and original gum in the majority of cases, represented the most significant philatelic offering of the decade. The pre-auction estimate was released on a Thursday morning, and by Thursday afternoon, it had been picked up by 2 newspaper art sections, then a numismatics journal, then a general interest news wire, then several platforms where Clara did not have accounts, but Priya did, and sent her screenshots with the message, "Rosa is having a moment." Rosa Mendez was mentioned by name in every article. The story? Immigrant seamstress, 60 years of quiet collecting, hope chest, $40 appraisal, granddaughter who noticed the weight, was the kind of story that found its own momentum because it confirmed something people wanted to believe. That worth persists regardless of whether it is witnessed, that patience can be a form of power, that the person everyone dismissed as having nothing may have been building something no one had thought to look for. Clara did not give interviews. Mr. Huang advised against it, and she agreed with his reasoning. And also she found that she was not interested in explaining Rosa to strangers when she was still in the process of understanding her herself. She gave one written statement, short and prepared carefully, that said, "My grandmother was a remarkable woman who understood the difference between what something is worth and what it appears to be worth. She trusted me to see the difference. I hope I am doing her justice." The coins sold first, at a San Francisco auction that Clara attended with Priya seated beside her. The room was not large, but it was full, and the bidding moved with the brisk energy of people who understood what they were looking at. The 1897 Liberty Head Double Eagle, the one Dr. Solis had assessed as potentially MS-66, sold for $11,000. Clara watched the number appear on the display board and felt Priya's hand close around her wrist. The total for the coin collection, $214,000. The jewelry sold the following month. The Alexandrite pendant, the color change stone, green in daylight and rose red under incandescent light, sold to a private collector in Geneva for $180,000. The emerald brooch, the one in the French Edwardian setting, went for $220,000. The ring and the remaining pieces brought the jewelry total to $640,000. and Clara paid her rent. $1,400 and 3 months of arrears, handed to the building manager in a cashier's check on a Tuesday morning. The building manager looked at the check, and then looked at Clara, and then at the check again. Clara said, "You can take the notice off the door." The building manager said she already had. She paid Marco's doctor. 3 months of medication, plus a pulmonologist referral that had been waiting, plus the specialist appointment she had been putting off because she could not afford the copay. Marco went to the specialist and came home with an updated treatment plan and a new inhaler that was smaller and more precise and worked better than the old one. And that night he slept through without coughing, and Clara lay in the dark, listening to him not cough for a long time, because the sound of your child breathing easily is a sound you don't appreciate fully until you've spent too many nights listening for the wrong kind of breath in the dark. She paid off the electric bill. She paid the medical bill from the previous year. She paid the credit card balance that had been accruing interest in the way only credit card balances accrue interest, steadily and without remorse. Each payment felt like setting something down, like redistributing weight across a frame that had been bearing too much in one place for too long. She bought a car, a 2019 Subaru with 60,000 miles and a heater that worked. She tested specifically and with some emotion on both sides. She sat in the parking lot of the dealership afterward and turned the heater on and pointed all the vents at herself and let it run for 5 full minutes, while Lily and Marco, in the back seat, asked various practical questions about whether the car had Bluetooth and whether they could change the seat color. And Clara said yes to everything without paying full attention because she was sitting in a car whose heater worked on both sides, and that was enough for the moment. She took the children to Point Reyes, coastline and mountains both, within driving distance, which satisfied the terms she had set for herself in her apartment on the morning after Rosa's chest had shown her what it contained. They hiked to the lighthouse on a clear day when the Pacific was the color Rosa's wedding quilt had once been. Deep blue faded at the edges, were vast and indifferent and beautiful. Marco ran ahead on the path, and Lily walked beside Clara and held her hand without being asked, which she had not done since she was 7, and Clara did not comment on it, because some things you receive quietly, the way Rosa had always received things that mattered. The stamps sold in New York in the spring. Clara flew with Priya. She had not been on an airplane in 6 years, not since a conference for school librarians in Phoenix that now felt like it had happened to someone else. The auction room was large and formal and full of people in the particular clothes of people for whom this was a normal Tuesday, and Clara sat in the 3rd row and watched Rosa's stamps, the stamps that a widow named Margaret Aldrich had pressed into Rosa's hands in 1963 because she didn't want them, because she couldn't see what they were, cross the stage one lot at a time. Lot 1, 7 examples, various grades. Opening bid, $3 million. Final hammer, $4,200,000. Lot 2, 8 examples, including the 2 original gum examples Dr. Solis had described as unprecedented. Opening bid, $5 million. Final hammer, $9,800,000. The room made a sound, not applause exactly, something more restrained, the sound of a professional audience acknowledging a result that exceeded expectation. The remaining lots sold across the afternoon, the final tally for the 31 stamps, $22 million. Clara did not react visibly. She had told herself she would not. and she kept the agreement with herself, and sitting with her hands folded in her lap, and her back straight, and her face composed in the way Rosa had always been composed. Not cold, not absent, but present in a fully interior way, taking the information in and letting it find its proper place without performing anything for an audience she hadn't chosen. Priya, beside her, was less composed. Priya made a sound that she immediately muffled with both hands and then turned to Clara with an expression that needed no words. Clara looked straight ahead at the stage where the last lot had just settled. $22 million. Rosa's stamps. Margaret Aldrich's inheritance from her father, handed to a seamstress as payment for alterations to a wardrobe of mourning clothes in 1963, because she couldn't see what they were. Rosa could see what they were. I believe they may be valuable. She had written, I am keeping them. The total proceeds from Rosa's collection, the coins, the jewelry, the bearer bonds with their 60 years of accumulated interest, and the stamps, came to just under $24 million after taxes and fees and the various costs of process that accompanied the movement of significant wealth from one form into another. Mr. Huang walked her through the numbers in his quiet Sunset District office, and she listened with the same attention she had brought to every stage of this, which was complete and unrushed and directed at understanding rather than at reaction. She asked him for time to think. He said, Take all the time you need. She took 3 weeks. She thought about Rosa, who had spent 60 years building something she never spent, so who had lived in a pale yellow house and driven a 1998 Buick and worn sensible shoes and pressed a corner mechanism in a wooden chest and added to what was there and never touched it. Not because she couldn't, but because that was not what the keeping was for. The keeping was not for spending. It was for the right hands at the right time with the right understanding. Clara thought about what Rosa had said once on a Sunday afternoon. Your great-grandfather believed a house should have a room no one knows about, not for hiding, for keeping. She thought about what it would mean to build something worth keeping and passing on. She established a fund. She did it with Mr. Huang's guidance and the counsel of a nonprofit attorney who specialized in educational endowments. The Rosa Mendez Fund, named simply and without embellishment, was capitalized with half of the net proceeds from the collection. Its purpose, stated in the founding documents with the same clarity Rosa had brought to her 60-year accounting ledger, was to provide direct financial support to single parents pursuing education or professional certification, with priority given to those who had experienced job displacement or family disruption. No complicated application, no character references. A panel of people who understood what it meant to be capable and stretched, and one disruption away from a different life, reviewing applications from people in the same position. The criteria Clara wrote herself. She knew the position from the inside. The first cycle of awards went to 23 people, but a woman in Oakland who had been a hotel housekeeper for 16 years and wanted to become a registered nurse. A man in the Mission who had lost his construction job and was studying to become an electrician. A single father in Daly City who had been a cook and was training to be a paramedic. 23 people who had been in the position Clara had been in, capable, determined, stretched to the precise limit of what determination alone could manage, and who now had room to breathe while they finished becoming who they were building toward. Clara went back to work, not to the diner. She contacted Franklin Elementary School's principal, a woman named Dr. Anita Osei, who had expressed genuine regret when the library position was eliminated and had said, "If anything changes, please reach out." And something had changed. Not the district's budget, but the landscape around it. Clara made a donation to the district's educational foundation, substantial enough to restore the librarian position at Franklin and 2 other schools. Then she applied for her own job back, and Dr. Osei called her within an hour and said, "When can you start?" She started on a Monday in late January. The library was exactly as she had left it. The beanbag chairs were dusty but present. The papier-mâché tree needed a branch repaired. The children who came through the door that first morning were different children, 2 years younger than the one she'd known. But they were the same children in the way that all children are the same children, curious and unfinished, and looking, without always knowing they were looking, for the adult in the room who would see them correctly. Clara saw them correctly. She always had. She moved, not far, a few miles, into a 2-bedroom apartment in a building that had a backyard where Lily could set up her easel and Marco could run. The apartment had natural light and a kitchen large enough for 2 children to flour a cutting board without hitting a wall. She brought the hope chest and positioned it in the living room beneath a window, where the marigold carving caught the afternoon light exactly the way it had caught the afternoon light in Rosa's living room for 41 years. She did not put anything in the chest, not yet. She left it empty, or close to empty. The quilts were back inside, the wedding quilt on top, Rosa's mother's diamonds of faded blue. The hidden compartments were clean and unoccupied and waiting, as hidden compartments do, for whatever someone who was paying attention would eventually decide they were worth keeping. Lily noticed the empty chest one afternoon and asked why there was nothing in the bottom half. Clara said, "It's for keeping." Lily said, "Keeping what?" Clara said, "I don't know yet. Whatever turns out to matter. The things you hold on to not because someone tells you to, but because something inside you recognizes them as real." Lily thought about this. She said, "Like how Abuela Rosa kept the stamps," Clara said. "Exactly like that." Lily went back to her drawing, and Clara stood in the afternoon light that came through the window over the chest, got the same thin gold of San Francisco winter that had been coming through windows in this city since before Rosa arrived, and would keep coming through windows long after both of them were gone. And she felt the particular fullness of a life that had not been repaired, but redirected. Not fixed. The divorce was still real. The lost years were still lost. The hard Tuesdays were still in her body. But redirected, the way a river redirects after meeting an obstacle, finding the shape of what comes next. Rosa had done that for her, had built the redirection 60 years before it was needed, and sealed it in a chest, and pressed the mechanism closed, and waited, with the patience of someone who understood that the right time is not always the time you are living in. Some gifts take decades to arrive. Some inheritances are not measured in the things they contain, but in the understanding they produce. The slow, certain knowledge that worth persists, regardless of whether it is seen. That attention is a form of love. That keeping something carefully and deliberately is its own kind of faith. A faith that what you hold matters. That the right hands will find it. That the person you love enough to build for will come back to the chest and notice the weight, and press the corner mechanism and find, in the dark space beneath the obvious, everything you were saving for exactly this moment. Rosa had known. She had always known. And on a January afternoon in San Francisco, in an apartment with a backyard and natural light, and a 2-bedroom that had room for 2 children to grow in, armed with a library job that started Monday, and a fund that was helping 23 people breathe, and a car with a heater that worked on both sides. Clara Mendez sat on the floor in front of her grandmother's hope chest and placed her hand flat against the carved marigolds and said, quietly, "To no one, and to Rosa, and to the room, and to whatever travels between people who love each other across the distance that death puts between them. I knew what to do with it. You were right. I knew." Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.